The Spin-off Podcast Network.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is climate adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirahama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire, coming at you on Monday the 8th of July, just after 8 a.m, with a very special edition of Gone by Lunchtime, a European edition, following 2 quite big, quite important elections, one in Britain and the other across the Channel in France. And we've gone to the only place you can, Henry Cooke, Henri Cooke, when he's speaking about the French elections, who is piping in to us this morning on his evening, late in the evening, from, where are you, Henri?
Bonjour, I'm Corfu, in Greece, but very near Albania.
A real commitment to democracy and discussions about democracy to go to the birthplace of democracy in order to have that conversation.
That's right. I mean, Athens is a few hundred kilometres away, but it is there.
Just up the road, really, isn't it, in the scheme of things? Hey, I expected Henry to come in this morning and to be saying to you, by how much has the National Rally won in France? The National Rally is, of course, the party of Marine Le Pen, formerly of her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, formerly the National Front, far-right party that has recently undergone what's meant to be a detoxification, but has all those vestiges of anti-Semitism, racism, even attachments to Nazism in its past. They had come first in the first round, and the question was whether they could get a majority instead. Well, tell us what we're looking at based on the exit round after the exit polls, beg your pardon, after the second round of voting in France.
So what we're looking at is essentially a complete reversal, well, not complete reversal. The kind of grouping of parties who came second at the last round, who are the National Popular Front, which is a collection of left-wing, leftist parties, everywhere from kind of the more traditional socialists who are essentially the French Labour Party, have had prime ministers and presidents and whatnot many times in the past, to the Insoumis or France Unbowed, who are much, and the actual French Communist Party, who are much further to the left, and Ecology, who are like the Green Party. They're now in first. Macron's parties, or kind of the assembly of parties behind Macron in the centre, Ensemble, or Renaissance is his specific party, they come second instead of third, which is what they came in the first round. And National Rally, or that were formerly the front, are third. Now it is that people, it's just an exit poll. So what are we talking so much about it? But it's worth saying with this exit poll, from what I understand, in France they're allowed to actually sample the real ballots to do the exit poll, as in they can take a few of the actual votes from the variety seats and look at them to make the estimation. So it's a pretty strong estimation. People are not treating this as a question at this point.
Yes, and I've just looked at the latest Ipsos numbers, and they've come back a little bit in terms of the margins, but it's still holding firm. So I think based on their earliest actual real numbers, it looks like that's going to hold, which is an incredible turnaround given what polls were showing us just in recent days. They were showing the National Rally coming in first. They were showing Macron's big call to be a disaster. But what happened, do you think, in the poll? Was it Mbappe's call? Mbappe, the French striker and captain, calling for people to think carefully? Did people have a moment when they went into the polling booth and think, "Oh, can't go with these guys"? What happened?
Well, there's only one poll that matters, which is, of course, the exit poll. No, but there's, I think the big probably changes, from what I can tell, turnout is dramatically up. And whenever you do a poll, a non-exit poll, you're always putting all these calculations in to try to guess about turnout and stuff, because that's probably one of your biggest variables. Will this person tells me this actually go out and vote, or how will it don't know, or I'm considering these two parties, will they just stay home when it go out? So given turnout's quite high up, that's probably quite a big thing. I'd say also, it's pretty easy to tell a pollster that you might be backing, let's say, the Republican candidate, that's kind of the small, much smaller, much diminished centre-right party, or you might be backing the centre candidate to a pollster because you want to bolster their support. But then once you actually get into the booth, you might say, well, the main thing for me is I don't want National Rally to win, and you'll go with whoever's ahead in your electorate. The crucial thing, the France's system is very different to ours. Obviously, I guess if we should explain it briefly, there's 2 rounds. And it's not quite a pure runoff where it's just the first 2 candidates who go forwards from one round. And if you win 12.5% or above, which is a lot of places where there's freeway races essentially, then you go through the second round. And you can talk a bit more about the strategy if you want, but it's been quite a lot of kind of behind the scenes strategizing for how to get those votes to go, I guess, the right way.
Yes, there was a big push following the first round in those seats where there were 3 remaining rather than the 2, that the worst performing of the centrist group or the left group would withdraw in order to make it a head-to-head battle rather than allowing a split vote on the centre and left and for the far right to come through. And I think in more than 200 of, 577 seats. So in a lot of seats, that actually happened, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And it's worth saying that the grouping of left-wing parties, the New Popular Front, were more kind of, they had a very clear message on the night of the first round saying we will set down anyone who's in third place, where we think the Macron centre candidate can win. The centrist parties led by Macron were a little bit more circumspect at first. They were kind of saying, because this is a grouping of left-wing parties, they were saying, well, we'll stand down where we think the left-wing party is, reasonable. We won't stand down for, the hard left. Yeah. But it seems that despite that slightly more muddled messaging, the public got the overall message, which is don't let National Rally.
So let's wind back a bit to where this started. These elections for the National Assembly are a result of a snap election, and a very snappy snap, like well ahead of when they could have happened, which is as far as like 3 years from now. It came a month ago, Henry, after European elections, which returned a huge result for the far right, for the National Rally. And talk us through what happened then. How did Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, the leader of the great centrist revolution, how did he respond?
Essentially, he made a big gamble. It's a lot of people suggest that he might have made a gamble looking across to what Pedro Sanchez did in Spain after having a set of bad local results. Pedro Sanchez essentially dared the kind of right to win an election and went to a snap election and ended up coming out victorious and still in control of the government. So, with basically a mandate renewed. It seems like Macron, who doesn't really have a great situation in the legislative chamber right now, which remember, France is a little bit more like the US, not perfectly, but a little bit more like the US than New Zealand or the UK, where you can be president but not have control of the legislature, which means basically if you're president, you have they call it a cohabitation with another party where you kind of control external affairs and make control internal affairs. He saw this as an opportunity not only to kind of stare down potentially a national rally, but also at the time of the European election, it seemed like the left, who was our big enemy, were disorganised and disarray, not cooperating at all. So it seemed like a really good time to kind of smash them down. But obviously what's actually happened for him is that the left have organised in a way they haven't really in decades. I mean, the Popular Front is a callback to the 30s. For context, there was a Popular Front of leftist parties in the 30s, have organised massively and have ended up the largest party, it seems. That said, there's kind of another theory I was picking as well, which is that actually he wouldn't mind if National Rally won government, because there's kind of a theory that the worst thing that can happen to a far-right political party is to actually have to govern. That will show up their shortcomings, and he'll still be able to kind of keep a bit of a steer of things as president, and then his party could come back in the next round and work that out. And it's worth noting that there's nothing stopping. I mean, Macron cannot call a snap election for another year, but he can call one in a year. So there's no telling that there won't be a 2025 snap legislative election as well.
I mean, arguably, I suppose what's happening in Italy suggests that you actually can have a reasonably functioning far-right government, and it's dangerous to open the door to that. It was, as you say, a massive gamble. It looked like it was going to backfire terribly for him. Is he sort of based on, we should remind everyone again, we're talking really about exit poll numbers. Is he on that basis vindicated?
I don't think he's quite vindicated. I think the strategy was not to let the left-wing parties become the largest party. I think the strategy was to have a new Republican front kind of election where, much like in the presidential elections, the left end up kind of grumbling coming along the centre and letting a lot of centrist parties. The prime minister of his party has just resigned on the basis of the exit poll. The new prime minister will be from a party that is not at all aligned to him at all. They'll obviously have to work out some kind of coalition, but it will not be a government as Macron would like it. You can see one of the huge issues in France in the recent years has been the raising of the pension age, and both the left and the right are opposed to that. So you can see potentially some kind of backtracking on that as the cost of power.
But the government that will form, will follow negotiations, will not be what many had been predicting if there had been a plurality of votes to the far right, which was largely a deadlock, right? I mean, this is actually something that he can, though cumbersome it might be, something he can work with. And, I mean, there is some sense in which we should say, I suppose, that the European elections are a bit like local elections operate sometimes in Europe and other parts of the world, or midterms in various parts of the world, in various parts of the world, seen as an opportunity for people to express their frustration and dissatisfaction. So it's kind of not, it's seen as a bit of a way of kind of waving a flag rather than the most serious vote you have. And in a way, it's sort of borne out by what's happened.
Absolutely. I mean, realistically, the European Parliament doesn't even really control the EU. Most of the EU's big decisions are made by kind of a head of state meeting and one of the several kind of various forums they have. There is stuff that the European Parliament has to do, don't be wrong, but it's not really like, as you say, it's not the most important vote you have. So it's a great example. It's a great time to say, screw you, I'm voting for someone who wants to tear your whole system down because it's not going to actually happen. The system is not actually going to get torn down. And it's also worth noting that I believe the European elections generally have much lower turnout, like local elections have much lower turnout.
Much lower.
So if you're a really motivated voter who hates the government, you'll go out. If you're just kind of a person who's like, life's okay, but I don't love Macron, you probably won't.
And so what does it mean for the far right? We've had Jordan Bardella, who's the sort of young 28 years old, is he? He's the leader of the parliamentary party, with Marine Le Pen standing back and likely to contest again the presidential race. I've seen already some reports them saying that this shows an anti-democratic system in France. Will they say we've been shut out again, the people's voice has been silenced, and try to use that as sort of kind of propulsion towards the presidential campaign, which is really the big one?
Absolutely. And it's worth noting this is still the best ever result for the National Rally. So while it's not the result that the polls were predicting and they came third, it's still a fantastic result for the party if you look at the scope of its history. I think someone was saying on Twitter that they only really got into power when the Wehrmacht were backing them, which is obviously something that they would contest. Yeah. I think looking forwards, look, this is not the end. This is I would say a temporary setback for the French far right on a long, long march. A march that's been going on for a very long time. And I don't see them the presidential election, I think it's all still to play for, basically. it'll really depend on how this government moves as well. Can this government kind of solve some of the problems that are making so many people in France so angry with the current system? And I guess the other question is, obviously a lot of the power of the far right comes from immigration politics, comes from the valence of immigration. And this is interesting. Well, if you look at New Zealand's Ipsos polls, I think about 2 or 3% of people say immigration or too much immigration is their top issue. It is far higher than that basically everywhere in Europe. And that is what is driving this wave of right-wing populism. Yeah. So is immigration a massive issue in the years to come? Probably. Yeah. If that's the case, probably National Rally do reasonably well.
An issue too, immigration in the UK. However, we saw arguably against the general run of play in Europe and the world, perhaps, a victory for Labour after 14 years of Tory rule, and what a ride. Just thinking, Henry, when have you moved to the UK? What, about a year and a half ago? Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, 2 years. I got to the UK in July.
So have you been through four prime ministers now since you got there?
Yes, Boris Johnson actually stood down after I got there, so I had a very small amount of time in Boris land.
Yeah,
although he was kind of caretaker prime minister for a while before Liz Truss was elected.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been, especially over the last 2 years, an incredible ride. Really, especially 2022. That 2022 is the kind of at its horriblest.
Amazing.
All of the faults are back. The polls have not, the polls moved a little bit of this campaign, but big picture, the polls are basically, in terms of Labour and the Conservatives, where they were in mid-2022.
Yeah.
When Boris, I guess, go back, Boris was behind in the polls after Partygate. It was not going perfectly for the Tories before he resigned. But he was behind in kind of single digits. And then after he left and Liz Truss happened, and that whole, budgetary nightmare happened, a gap opened up that they never managed to recover from.
A 20-point gap, roughly, wasn't it? And it was totally a sort of situation of, surely things can't get worse than this, can they? And then you wake up the next day watching from the other side of the world, and they sure could. Just an absolute catalogue of disasters.
I guess the main thing to remember is everyone in the entire Western world was experiencing high interest rates. And was experiencing kind of the mortgage backlash of that, people who can't pay their mortgage very well because of the high interest rates. Also, business kind of invest and all that stuff. But, the kind of proximate big thing was mortgage pain. Only in the UK was one party very much kind of catered by that as like essentially doing that. I know, obviously in New Zealand, the National Party would love to say that the high interest rates are, due to Labour overspending, and there's, elements of truth to that. It's arguable. In the UK, because it was so clearly that the Tories had kind of lost their fiscal credibility, and so clearly the Bank of England had to step in, and so clearly had Liz Truss during the campaign for leadership said that it was okay if interest rates went up in response to their plan, that it was the easiest kind of political layup in the world for Labour to say, the Tories put your mortgage up, the Tory mortgage bombshell. Yeah. And you just don't really forget that straight away. If you actually are blaming one party for your mortgage being more expensive, or if you're blaming one party for the Bank of England having to step in to save your pension, that's a long road back for them.
And at the same time, the Conservative Party basically lost all their moral authority after, a succession of scandals. You mentioned Partygate, and that was, of course, the breaches of Brexit rules that were witnessed at Downing Street. A series of other things, including just a host of what seemed like deeply self-serving scandals. And that meant that the Labour Party was able to say, Sir Keir Starmer, who is the new Prime Minister in Britain, was able to say during the campaign, indeed after it, that Labour would, that it was country first and party second. And that's a very clear message about what people had come to perceive the Tories as, which is party first or one each, the ego first and everything else second. And that meant that Labour ran a campaign which was described as the Ming Vase strategy. That is to say, all they needed to do was hang on to the Ming Vase containing that 20-point lead in the polls, get from one side of the hall to the other and the conclusion of the election campaign, and then, watch the landslide roll in. That's what happened. Was this really a big victory for Labour, Henry, or was it just a big repudiation of the Tories?
I think it's both. It was a huge repudiation of the Tories, and you can see that in the amount of strategic voting, the amount of wins for the Lib Dems, the amount of the reform, really. There was a lot of people. I think it's one of their worst results ever, and they're a party that's existed longer than New Zealand has as a country. So there is a huge push against Tories, which is the biggest thing. That said, Labour are in government with a huge amount of power for the next 5 years, and potentially the next election kind of pretty easily served up. They've taken that good situation and run with it very well, and I'm sure we'll talk about how shallow the victory is given how low the popular vote share was for them. And that's, I think, a very genuine criticism and a very serious kind of debate for the party to have. Is this a landslide? But they'll, much like New Zealand Labour, lose the next time very easily. However, it's probably worth noting that they play to the electoral system that they're in. You don't play rugby you don't play rugby union to rugby league rules because you prefer rugby league. And I'm not sure if that metaphor works. I don't know anything about sport, but I keep going. I think while there was a low popular vote for them, they did have a particularly efficient, is what they call it, strategy where they won a huge array of seats. So while obviously the big structural thing in the election was that everyone wanted to get the Tories out, Labour have taken that hand of cards and played them perfectly.
You might call it, indeed, the Gareth Southgate strategy. That is to say, on Labour's part, you can be uncharismatic, uninventive, underwhelming, but as long as you know what the rules require for you to progress and create history, then you can do extremely well.
You can technically win games. Yes.
You can technically win games. It's the penalty shootout.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Look, I mean, let's just dwell on that for a little bit, because you've anticipated some of this. Yes, you play the system you have. First past the post is designed in a particular way. Labour targeted particular seats. Having said that, the overall vote, 33.8 is the latest, when I just looked it up, for Labour. That's barely better than last time. I've just done some back of the envelope numbers here, if you will bear with me. Labour, by my count, got 23,540 votes for every seat they won, right? So less than 24,000 votes for every seat they won. Tories, 56,000. Lib Dems, who had a very good night, 49,000. Reform Party, which is the far-right party in the UK, this is the party that Nigel Farage came back to lead, and in many ways is the godchild of the Brexit Party, the godchild of UKIP. It's the far right in Britain, anti-immigration, all that. They won more than 4 million votes, and so where Labour won every seat 23,000 votes, for Reform it was 820,000 votes per seat. I mean, it's
not fair.
Whatever you think of Reform, that's out of control. That's out of control.
It's absolutely not fair. And look, I'm probably, if you meet me and talk about British politics to me in Britain, I will tell you about how much better MMP is. I think it's a very interesting thing. The debate on proportional representation, PR, as they call it here, some kind of system like MMP or STB or something, I think will be moved on by this election quite seriously, because it is manifestly unfair that Labour have, I think, close to 70% of the seats with that, 30-something% of the vote. That is the way FPP works. It rewards winners massively. Everyone, I think there was a great quote about the New Zealand system from Jack Vowles that the problem with FPP is that it elected minority governments that thought they had a majority.
Yeah.
And that is always the case with FPP. You very rarely win an actual, popular vote majority, a la Jacinda Ardern in 2020. So I think it's very interesting to see how the right react to this, because traditionally in the UK, right-wing maps to support for FPP, whereas left-wing maps for somewhat more support for PR. Nigel Farage has long been an advocate for PR, because this is actually a much better result than what happened with UKIP in 2015.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was 2015. Yeah. You got heaps of votes and no seats.
They got one.
Which is obviously even less fair. It was a one seat.
Yeah.
Apologies. Just not fair at all. So, whether people can make that leap in their mind of why PR is more fair on the right will be interesting. I saw the Daily Express running 3 or 4 stories on Friday morning explaining what PR was, explaining what the results would be under PR. And, this is not something that you would usually see in the Daily Express.
But this is only because the Express has become the local rag for the far right, right? I mean, that's incredibly self-serving.
Oh, absolutely incredibly self-serving. But, electoral reform often happens because it is self-serving. For sure. The interesting thing, I mean, you'd think you need a referendum if it was to happen in the UK. And realistically, most of the UK governing class has referendum itis after Brexit.
Yeah.
Whenever I talk to people about it, I say the only way you'll get it is kind of something a little bit proximate to the New Zealand experience. The New Zealand experience is 2 governments who basically really piss off all their core voters. Not all the core voters, but a lot of those. A Labour government, which eventually people think has gone far too far to the right economically, and then a National Party elected national government saying that it will kind of take things back to the centre, but then even going further to the right economically. That was a very unique set of circumstances, where also, of course, there was a Royal Commission report kind of sitting ready to go. There was the David Longy actually saying in the debate. There was all this kind of, various kind of sliding doors moments that led to MMP. But essentially, the really big thing was that voters saw it as had a way to say, screw you to both the major parties, and took it with both arms. And I mean, if you look forward 5 years, it's pretty easy to see this Labour government disappointing a lot of people. They're sticking to spending plans they've inherited. They've ruled out a lot of big things. The UK economy might have turned a corner, but maybe it hasn't. Maybe all the problems that it has right now will kind of continue to fester, and they'll become poorer than Poland, which is kind of the big projection that gets a lot of people worried in this country. If that happens, if both parties seem to have absolutely failed the country, then maybe you will see a kind of more concerted PR push that is successful. But from here, it's hard to see right now.
Yeah. I mean, at minimum, I think it's likely to be a debating issue, that it'll come where for a long time it's been below the surface. I remember it was in 2011, there was a referendum on alternative vote, which isn't even a proportional system, but is a fairer one, which is where, as in Australia, if you it means that you can't just win a hopeless plurality in an electorate. And that was chucked out. That was rejected. And since then, there hasn't been much. Darren Hughes, funnily enough, who people remember from New Zealand politics past, as the head of the Electoral Reform Society. Is that what it's called? So he's the one who will be visible around about.
If you read British newspapers closely, as I do, you will see many letters from Darren Hughes writing about, if only PR was here, XYZ would happen. And I would expect that they'll have a pretty good campaigning period in the next couple of years. He might feel personally somewhat icky about allying himself with reform, but I think it's probably any friend in this fight.
Well, I mean, I guess the other part of that is I think that there's an argument to be made that the system meant that the boil up of fury through lack of representation manifested in the Brexit vote. But that's another conversation. Let's leave that for another time. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was is a kind of contradictory result for Labour in more than one way. You mentioned the shallowness of it, which does mean that it isn't, while you would think that to win 412 of 650 seats, a massive landslide, should insulate Labour for 2 terms, for 10 years at least. It may not be the case. But also part of that failure to really get a landslide in popular vote terms was some pushback from the left, which manifested most obviously in Jeremy Corbyn winning in Islington North, his seat. He's been chucked out of the Labour Party in relation to anti-Semitism allegations. He stood as an independent. A handful of other independents won too, and many of them standing on not just a harder left line than Labour, who are promising to not adjust taxes or anything like that, but also because of Gaza, feeling that Starmer and the Labour leadership have been too weak in standing up for Palestine. There was also reflected in Starmer's seat itself in Holborn as well. There was Andrew Feinstein won 6,000 votes, and I think Starmer's actual win fell back on the previous election. And that, again, Feinstein, a former ANC guy, was strong on the Gaza issue. That's something that Starmer needs to be alert to, that will be probably, with the Tories and tatters, as big a challenge to the Labour Party politically in the term to come as the right.
It will be a big challenge. I guess the big question, so there's two things to kind of disentangle here. There's the left-wing push and there's the Gaza-focused push. I guess the question with the Gaza-focused push is, will Gaza still be an issue of this much valence? Well, the Israel-Palestine situation will be an issue of this much valence, this much importance at the next general election in 2029. Now, I think everyone hopes not, just hopes that the conflict is not at all that bad then. So at that level, we have to think, is this issue, without the issue having so much importance, will a lot of that kind of fall away, or will these new MPs be able to kind of build a wider platform? Because there is definitely an argument that the Muslim populations, who are usually very solid Labour backing population, have basically been taken for granted. And that's the problem with FPP. Once you're a safe population, of course, you do get taken for granted. It doesn't matter if you win a seat in an FPP round by 51% or 70%. So once you're a safe population, you get ignored, and clearly there's a bit of that kind of underneath all the Gaza stuff. But it wouldn't be surprising to me if in 2029 a lot of those seats kind of flip back to Labour, simply because the issue is not as important and because those independents have not been able to build enough of a serious kind of platform within those seats. I mean, it's notable that the Workers' Party, George Galloway, who was elected on a Gaza platform, lost his seat to Labour. So it's not necessarily being in that seat does not necessarily mean that you'll win it over and over again. Jeremy Corbyn, on the other hand, who obviously has a Gaza part of that, but also has just a much stronger left-wing vision than Labour, and obviously has a lot of name recognition and profile, especially in the seat where he's been he's been an MP for many decades. That's a different kind of challenge, and that one is much longer term and much, I think, overall probably more of a worry for Starmer in the kind of next electoral term rather than the next couple of years.
We'll come back in a moment to what the agenda might be, but just quickly, the Lib Dems did very well, returning to solidity after a sort of quite interesting acrobatic campaign. The Greens did very well, a bit of a story that's got lost there, I think winning 5 seats, which is a pretty impressive effort given the electoral system. But also the SNP, the Scottish National Party, they got hammered, didn't they? They got hammered.
Absolutely hammered, which if you're like me and you enjoy watching Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP in Westminster in the House, you'll be happy that he's still at least one. He's probably the best questioner in PMQs. But you see, the Scottish National Party, they got absolutely hammered. There's a lot of causes to that. There's a few things there. One is that basically, Scottish independence is not really on the agenda right now. The Westminster have kind of made clear that devolution does not mean that you can have another referendum. So there's no kind of prospect of another referendum in any time soon. And if there's no kind of prospect of a referendum, it's hard to really talk about it as if it's going to happen anytime soon. So I think the SNP, that's the core issue, and they don't have it right now. They don't really run on it because of that. But without having that, I mean, a lot of those voters are kind of naturally left-wing Labour voters who are more at home there. Also, obviously, a lot of those voters were probably a little bit sick of the SNP in government in Scotland, which has not been the easiest ride for them at all.
Its leadership has been changed twice, yeah.
Their third First Minister in a few years right now. And they, and also, obviously, if you want to be part of kind of kicking the Tories out, as much as you can say, the SNP are also kicking the Tories out, a lot of people would have said, no, I want to have an MP who might be in cabinet or might be right at the heart of power, who I can tell do X, Y, Z for Scotland, do X, Y, Z for this bit of my area. It's really, if you zoom out a bit, it's quite interesting. It's a little bit of a reversion to the pre-2015 world. Back before 2015, the Lib Dems held much of the southwest, kind of the old country of Wessex, before England was formed. The Lib Dems have a great time there, where say they've retained, and Labour held most of Scotland, and we're kind of back there. Obviously, Labour having more seats than they had then, but there is a bit of a reversion to kind of the normal pattern of politics, rather than kind of the more bombastic, strange years between 2015 and 2024.
That lack of appetite for, talking about Scottish independence right at the minute is part of a broader mood, not just in Britain, but in Europe and around the world, and to a large extent, which is people are just very focused on cost of living. People are very focused on their immediate economic circumstances. And that underpinned the Labour campaign, of course, which was, let's very much stick to the immediate needs. Let's very much talk about getting things back in order. So it was a small target strategy by Labour. It was that Ming Vaz strategy, the Gareth Southgate strategy, call it what you will. Is their agenda more substantial than it seems on the surface, or will it be a do little government?
I don't think it'll be a do-little government. I do think it won't spend as much as a lot of people would like, at least in the first 2 years, which actually is quite similar to the first few years of the Blair government, where Brown also stuck to the kind of Tory spending plans. But what there potentially is a lot of movement in is things that don't cost anything, or things that will actually make the government quite a lot of money. So planning reform is the big one, and we have a lot of planning reform going on in New Zealand right now, so everyone knows a little bit about it. It's a little bit boring, but basically, much like in New Zealand, it's very hard to build a house or lots of other things in the UK, because various local groups can come and tell you that they don't want their view of the M25 or something ruined. So that's the big promise from Labour, and it's something that you really do need a decent-sized majority to do, is serious planning reform to unlock growth. So if that works, if that actually is a big bang, and there is, a lot more with investment into the UK, a lot of people building lots of new houses, housing's a lot cheaper, so people can move around a lot more, all those kind of nice flow-on effects, then that would be a fairly substantial change. Well, it's not going to be a big bang, and that, it's not going to actually, even if you have big planning reform, it's still going to take a while for all that investment to kind of bear fruit. There's also a lot of other kind of more constitutional stuff that could potentially have an option. 16-year-olds is on the agenda in England, which is quite a big deal. I know a lot of people think it was, kind of basically screw the scum to the left. Really, we don't know what it will do over time. It might do that immediately, but it might not do that over time. And realistically, 16 and 17-year-olds are not a massive proportion of the population versus older people, so it's not going to crazily change the proportion of the entire voting base. So there is stuff like that. I think that there could be quite a lot of move on, and there is stuff that's anything that's not in their manifesto. So when Gordon Brown and Tony Blair came to power, they made the Bank of England, their version of the Reserve Bank, independent on the second day of government. They had a campaign on it. They also had it voted out. It was a big bang, big change, and you can see potentially some of that stuff down the pipe. Maybe you can also see, them basically keeping the Ming Vaz in their hands and still trying to do as small targeted strategy as possible, and at least the first couple of years of government to kind of, get their feet.
And the Tories, they have been left with, 121 seats, which in British terms... It's all the seats
in New Zealand's parliament. Almost.
Yeah, that's right. But in British terms, it's their smallest result for over a century, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I guess the interesting thing about that is, how much do you think that really holds them back? So there's an argument that, it's taken out some of their it's definitely taken out some of their leadership contenders. Penny Mordaunt is no longer an MP, and she was a really strong one.
Where might a lay listener have recognised Penny Mordaunt from, Henry?
Penny Mordaunt held a sword at the coronation, and it was very cool.
Yes.
She's also just charismatic, fairly good looking, and could kind of play the centre and could write quite well. So she was a great hope for them. But she's no longer an MP. Now that doesn't mean there aren't other people who can take on the leadership. And it's worth, if you compare it to New Zealand, to 2020, if you remember, I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the 20s, the amount of MPs that National had.
Yeah.
And they won re-election in 2023.
Yeah.
So you can come back. If you are ruthless enough in terms of message discipline, if you get a leader who people actually like, the size of your majority, the size of your seats in Parliament is not the end of the world. The Tories will still have probably 2 newspapers at least and a TV channel essentially dedicated to promoting their message, unless those papers and media channel kind of slip more to reform.
Yeah.
So the real question for the Tories is if they can eat that right-wing reform vote while also still winning back the centre, because they do both at once. Now, that is very tricky.
So what happens? Which way do they tack? Do they tack to the centre or do they tack to the right?
Depends on who wins the leadership, really. And you can see, potentially it could be someone like Jeremy Hunt who just held onto a seat, which would definitely tack to the centre. But from what I can, probably in the first couple of years, if we look around to what usually happens, what happened to Labour, when they're in opposition, they'll probably try to tack right a little bit and try to win back a bit of the reform vote. But doing that while also winning back Lib Dem voters is going to be, very hard. But I think probably in the first instance, right.
Yeah. There was George Osborne, a former Chancellor, put it like this. He said, the first instinct of the Conservative Party will be, you didn't like what we were offering, we'll double it. So I think that's probably a fair prediction of what we'll come to see in the next few days.
I should say, you can fuse these things a little bit. You can be an anti-immigration kind of big stater. That's essentially what Boris Johnson was. He was kind of culturally conservative a little bit on immigration.
Sure, but
not really right-wing on economics. And it worked.
It's not just that. It's also the culture war stuff, isn't it? There are a clutch of MPs who've won their seats, who fancy the leadership, who want to go full on down a culture war path, and sort of American culture war path. And I think that's the thing that, people in the, for want of a better term, the Rory Stewart camp fear, is that the Conservative Party starts to become a caricature right-wing party and focuses on all that sort of territory rather than on trying to win back the centre.
Yes, they become basically broadcasters instead of part of the natural party of government. That is definitely a risk.
The GB News political branch. Henry, draw your bow as long as you wish and tell us what lessons are there, if any, for New Zealand? One of the first things Starmer is doing is going off to NATO, where Christopher Luxon will be as well, so I'm sure they'll chat. And Luxon has already congratulated the new Labour Prime Minister, of course. What from whether it's from the Labour victory or the result as a whole, are there any sort of lessons for people in the world of New Zealand politics?
Competence is the main thing for parties. I write about politics for a living, as do you to a extent. I'm sure you love talking about ideology and thinking through all these things. But the big thing that lost the Tories the election on such a large scale was not that people decided they didn't like. They woke up one day and decided actually that they were left wing. They woke up one day and decided that the Tories did not know what they were doing, that they could not deliver on even the promises they were making. Even if you didn't like the promises, they could not deliver on those promises. Now, this sounds quite a lot like a lot of New Zealanders' experience in 2023, when they woke up one day, not necessarily thinking that Jacinda Ardern was a bad or evil person, or Chris Hipkins even was a bad or evil person who they hated and disagreed with, but that these people just couldn't get done what they said they were going to do. Think Auckland like rail, harbour crossing, think various ministers having many problems. So I think the big lesson is, at the end of the day, if you are able to project competence, if you're able to look like you know what you're doing, even if the things you're doing are not necessarily, majority popular and not polling at 80%, if you can look, I have a plan, I'm doing this plan, and the other guys cannot even do the plans that they have, that will probably keep you in government. And you can see that in the National Party strategy, and you know that they watch this stuff very closely. There'll probably also be a lot of other lessons that the campaigners will take about how to run boards around electorates and how to do, Top and Gurren style campaigning and stuff like that. But I think the big picture stuff is what matters more than your ideology is whether you can do what you say that you want to do.
Terrific. Thank you, Henry, spoken like an apostle at Delphi. There you are in Greece. Can I just please encourage you? It is July. It's very hot. Make sure you wear a hat, slip, slop, slap when you're out there in Corfu for us, will you?
Thank you. Of course, I will.
It's been fun to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Toby.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.